Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, Assistant Sports Editor for Multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined by Christopher Carter, our Steelers insider, for the Wednesday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast. Lots to dig into today. Chris and I are going to get into the running game. What are the issues that are preventing it from succeeding? How much is it holding the passing game and Aaron Rodgers back in terms of situational football? Where does Kaleb Johnson belong in this mix? Where does Najee Harris' absence fit into the mix? We're going to talk about all that. Then later we're going to talk about Chris's film study, which you can check out in written form on postgazette.com, talking a lot about one-on-ones and failures on the Steelers defense and whether or not they can be cleaned up in future weeks. So a lot to get to. Before we do, we want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's Edgar Snyder Associates. Law firms come and go, but what law firm has been here in Western PA fighting for injury victims for more than 40 years? It's Edgar Snyder Associates. What firm has a staff of over 130 people who live and work here? It's Edgar Snyder Associates. Law firms come and go, but Edgar Snyder is a name you can always trust. So remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. If you've been hurt in an accident, call them at 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit edgarsnyder.com. They're available 24/7. Chris, let's get into the running game a bit here. It seems fair to say, I think, for a lot of people that, people talk about the Steelers, how it's their identity running the football. I think Mark Sanchez was talking about it on the broadcast on Fox. But I don't think that necessarily has to be the identity or should be the identity when you have Aaron Rodgers at quarterback and all of the tools that he brings to the table. Nevertheless, with the way the offensive line is protecting him right now, these 3rd and 9s, 3rd and 8s, 3rd and longer that you're getting into at times because you can't run the ball effectively seem to be a major conundrum because it forces the offensive line to have to protect Aaron Rodgers in these obvious passing downs for longer. I'll also say there were times, I think, particularly in the second half of that game against the Jets, where they were getting 4 or 5 yards a run, and that helped set up that second half that helped them win the game. So is that the conundrum right now?
It does to some extent. I think that part of this is the Steelers, like you said, they're not necessarily going to be a team that wants to ground and pound you just yet. Their offensive line is young. They're still forming. I think that's a big reason why they got an Aaron Rodgers to add to this offense, because Aaron Rodgers, if the offensive line does just enough, if the run game does just enough, he can make smart decisions to base off of that. For example, in week 1, the Jets bit a lot on play action. And as soon as they did, Aaron Rodgers was like, thank you. Here's that. The Seahawks in week 2 didn't bite as much because they said, I don't know about this. I think that you guys aren't actually going to run as much. And when you do, it's not going to crush us. And so in that, I think that didn't open up as many opportunities as the Steelers hoped it would. And there were several plays where I think the Seahawks were able to throw more into their coverage efforts that either took away all the options or at least took away what Aaron Rodgers initially thought would be there. And he didn't have enough time to cycle through his reads and find the open guy. And that's something we're doing for a Wednesday film study for the Post-Gazette. But I think that the run game does need to be a part of solving that. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how they want to go about doing that, because Jaylen Warren is right now their feature back. And I thought he had a really good game, against the Seahawks. But even in doing so, he averaged less than 4 yards per carry. They need that rushing offense to be averaging over 4 yards per carry. And I think they need it for, in different ways too. It can't just be just inside zones up the middle. It needs to have ways to spread the field a little bit and use different things. I think this offense has the capability of it, but they need to see that sooner rather than later, because this offense is not built to dominate with one particular part of the offense versus another. It's built to have a balanced attack that forces you into tough guessing games that eventually set up Aaron Rodgers to make good decisions.
How much blame do you place on the offensive line for the struggles with the running game, and how much do you place on the running backs? Because I think you can construct arguments for both with the offensive line. Obviously, they're struggling in pass protection pretty mightily. And there, you would expect some of those youth and problems to translate there. But you can also say, listen, Jaylen Warren's a great one-cut runner, but does not seem to have a ton of gears. I think you could say similar things about Kenneth Gainwell and why he's kind of been a career backup to this point in his career. So when you're trying to sort through, who's to blame for where they are, how do you apportion that to those two groups?
I think the offensive line mostly for now, simply because they're still figuring each other out. So much of what an offensive line does is not necessarily just pure skill by one player to another or pure talent. It's about cohesion. It's about stepping at the same foot, hitting the guys at the exact same times, at the right times, and then knowing how to counter the most slightest of things, whether when a guy lines up an A gap versus B gap, whether he's lined up on this, your inside shoulder versus outside shoulder versus, the guard's inside shoulder versus the tackle's outside shoulder. That's where I think that the Steelers are still figuring things out, is those exact detail points for this offensive line to hit. And for mostly they're a young offensive line, it was always going to take time. The example that I always bring up to people when they ask, well, what do you mean? Well, did Marquise Pouncey and David DeCastro figure it out? I'm like, yeah. But go back to the start of 2013 when David DeCastro accidentally took out Marquise Pouncey on the first drive of the year, where he tried to cut block his man, dove right into Pouncey's knee, took him out for the entire season. And there were times that group had some early tough sleddings. That's part of what happens with offensive lines, not necessarily the injury part, but it takes time for guys to come together and to figure each other out, and for the line to figure out who are our anchors right now. For example, in week 1, I thought Broderick Jones was really rough. Week 2, I thought he was solid. Wasn't very good, but he was solid. And that's an improvement for where he had been. Week 1, Trey Fautanu, I thought was okay, but in week 2, I thought he struggled a bit more. It's going to take time for these guys to figure out, hey, this is what does work. This is what doesn't work. This is what works against this guy versus this style of player. Those are the things that I think are getting in the way of the run game right now, more so than the running backs. Sure, I think there's times where, Kenneth Gainwell maybe isn't the guy you want to run in the red zone because he's just, that's not his style of expertise. But to me, the bigger thing right now is just the O-line is still figuring things out. And that's, again, where I think that Aaron Rodgers comes into play, is that he can find ways to help them out with different ways that he can take advantage as a defense. But eventually, teams are going to sit back on the play action, on the different passing concepts, and it's going to be harder for Aaron Rodgers, because you're putting the offensive line in to have to hold up for longer in pass protection. So to negate all of that, you got to get the run game going. It's definitely a goal for the Steelers throughout this first half of the season.
Chris, you mentioned the Kenneth Gainwell and the red zone situation. The guys on our Steelers practice report, Jerry Dulac, Rayfield Apollo, they were talking about, is that a spot where you'd like to use Kaleb Johnson a little bit more in the future? I think specifically about that second down there after Jaylen Warren's big long pass play, has a run that goes nowhere, leads to the interception in that back corner, and pretty much the game unraveled from that point. Does Kaleb Johnson belong in that mix, or do you look at the gaffe he had on special teams and say that's evidence that he needs some level of NFL seasoning before you're putting him in a situation like that where, the game in hindsight ended up being on the line?
I wouldn't put too much on that just yet. When it comes to the special teams, as far as his running back play, it was an atrocious special teams play that does need to not ever happen again, and he won't be returning kicks for the short time, as Mike Tomlin said, and I think that's the appropriate response there. But I do think that there's a place for Kaleb Johnson to be in a goal line situation, or to be in a short yardage situation when Jaylen Warren is, maybe you want to give him a breather, because after that he has a 65-yard run. You want to make sure that he gets a breather so he can come back out fresh, and then that way you can have it. But I also think that there's sometimes nuance to different situations. For example, the reason Kenneth Gainwell is mainly in the Steelers offense is because he's a versatile tool that can be motioned out and catch passes in space and run decent routes. Like, for example, on the DK Metcalf touchdown catch, if you look at the all 22 of that film, Kenneth Gainwell runs a Texas route, cooks his man, and is wide open in the middle part of the end zone. Now, it didn't matter because Aaron Rodgers found DK Metcalf, but those are the things that Kenneth Gainwell can bring as a receiving back, and that can be very valuable even in tight spaces. But I think that there's a potential that Aaron Rodgers got to the line. He has his checks that he goes through, that he can switch to whatever he sees as fit in the offense. And he looked and he said, you know what? We are going to hand it off to Kenneth Gainwell here and give this a shot. And it just wasn't there. So I do think Kaleb Johnson will get involved at some point, maybe not right away. But part of it is, I think that the Steelers with Aaron Rodgers, we've heard in the past couple years, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, Kenny Pickett, they didn't have the ability to straight up audible plays. Aaron Rodgers absolutely does. That this is he's not going to be able to call the plays, but he has more checks and freedoms to change things that he sees based off of what defenses are showing. And so I think that the Steelers want versatile backs who can pass protect, catch the ball, and run the ball. And right now, I think Kaleb Johnson can do the running the ball part, but he can't. But I think he still might struggle as a pass protector, and doesn't have the surest hands yet as a receiver. So that might be why Warren and Gainwell are being prioritized over Johnson at this point, even when it comes to the goal line. But I do think that'll change at some point.
Chris, how much do you think the Steelers are missing Najee Harris or not? I think that's an important kind of part B to the Kaleb Johnson question, because obviously he's the piece that you've removed from the equation since last season. Because I don't want to commit revisionist history here either, because we all know that this running game was not any great shakes with him in there for the last handful of years. That's part of why he's not here anymore. So I'm curious to hear where you land on the absence of Najee Harris and the impact that it's having on this running game so far.
I think it's going to take more than just 2 weeks to determine that right now, but I do think it could be significant if the Steelers do not turn into a good red zone rushing offense. Now, again, as far as the red zone offense, they were perfect in week 1. They messed up 1 of 2 in week 2. So it's tough to really judge too harshly on that. But I think Najee Harris, the big thing for me for Najee Harris was that he would get yards that weren't there, the tough, hard yards, because the Steelers' offensive line was either not even mediocre, but like below average to bad at times. And if the Steelers offensive line gets better this year, you won't miss Najee Harris as much, because you'll see holes open up for Jaylen Warren that weren't there for Najee Harris. And you'll think, oh, well, Jaylen Warren's making great plays. But I think the big thing that could turn into a thing, and it hasn't yet because Jaylen Warren's protected the football, is Najee Harris did not fumble the football. And that was such a key thing for the Steelers. You go back to some of the years right before he got there. You think back to like Stephen Ridley fumbling in key situations. James Conner had some crucial fumbles in key situations. It was an issue for whoever they got at running back. And Jaylen Warren last year had a couple fumbles that were costly. One that almost cost them, I believe, against the Commanders. They were able to come back from that one. But I think if you miss Najee Harris, that's the primary thing. He looked fine for the Chargers when he played on Monday Night Football. But again, I'm not going to say that the Steelers necessarily miss him just yet, because we got to see how this running game actually does work out. And again, week 2, I thought Jaylen Warren was actually probably the Steelers' best player from scrimmage.
Chris, we are going to get into the defense in the next segment. Some interesting thoughts you had on postgazette.com on your film study about what is not working there. So everyone, please make sure you stay tuned for that, and we will talk to you on the other side here. We are back on the Wednesday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Adam Bittner. He's Christopher Carter. We're talking about the Steelers defense, its breakdowns, why are they happening. Chris, you did your film study on postgazette.com, and the big theme seemed to be just getting beat in some situations. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing on film from this group?
What's wild is, sometimes you look at a defense that gives up some big plays. Right now, the Steelers through week 2 have given up the most 15-yard plays in the NFL through 2 weeks. That's pretty bad. But when you look at a lot of these plays, and that's not necessarily the ones that I highlight with the film study because I focused more on third down plays, but you're seeing guys getting the matchups like you think, oh, Tory Horton versus Jalen Ramsey, I'll take that matchup, and they're just not winning. Or Keanu Benton in the hole where you expect him to win a little bit more consistently, and he doesn't win. Or Peyton Wilson out in space saying, hey, go chase down Kenneth Walker and make a tackle. Those are the things that I think have to happen when if you're playing this style of defense. It's not necessarily saying, hey, it's not asking anyone to be Superman. It's not saying, hey, go out there and rig this ridiculous play. It's, hey, we're expecting you guys to win these positions here, and if you don't, it's going to cost us. And that's what kept happening to them on third downs, especially on Sunday. There was on the first third and long conversion that the Seahawks had was an in-breaking route from Jackson Smith and Jigba. He gets in front of Jalen Ramsey, and it's an open target for Sam Darnold. If Jalen Ramsey maintains inside leverage on that play, Darnold doesn't get a free lane to throw the ball, and TJ Watt was one step away from sacking him on that play. Maybe he doesn't get the sack, maybe he does, but either way, it's not a third down conversion, and they're at least punting the ball in that situation. And so that's where I think that they lost so many spots. Like, the 3rd and 9 play where Sam Darnold spun out of the pocket and was able to hit A.J. Barner for a 25-yard gain that ultimately ended up in the game-sealing touchdown. The Steelers called a blitz, and a good one. Patrick Queen came untouched right into the pocket, completely whiffed on his opportunity to sack Sam Darnold. Those are just one-on-one opportunities the Steelers have to capitalize on. And when they don't, it ends up hurting you, because then you don't get to set the tone of the play. The other team does. And as that happens, then things get worse. They continue to win. You give them opportunities, and you don't take your chance to be a playmaking defense, which this group is supposed to be.
When I hear that, Chris, I'll be honest, with the less trained eye, I've never played football, but those sound like red flags to me, that you're getting beat with some level of consistency in these crucial moments. And then when you hear the players talk about it, they're like, oh yeah, we just got to clean that one up, and that one, and that one, and that one. And there's a lot to clean up. And they make it sound as if they know what the problem is and they have the ability to fix it. I say, well, if you're making all these mental errors, that's a place that you're deficient compared to your opponent. And if you're just flat getting beat physically, and I put the Patrick Queen whiff there of like, the play was better to be made, he didn't make it physically. You add that up, it's a lot to just like snap your fingers and fix, especially what we've seen from it'd be one thing if we hadn't seen this down the stretch last season, but we did. This is becoming a like half season worth sample size of them saying the same things as if they're easy to fix, but evidence showing us that it's not.
See, the only thing with that is that I do feel like last season was a little bit different, that like there were times where guys were just not in the right spots, and there were just like, whoa, what the heck happened there? I don't think that was the case, especially this past week. I think guys were in the right spots. They just lost certain matchups. But I also think that there's a chance that with the Steelers not the chance. This is the challenge that I think that faces the Steelers when it comes to figuring out how to move forward with this defense. You have to choose to either put continued faith that your guys are going to win these matchups. You're just going to come in and be able to just have a better week. Sometimes bad weeks happen, and you're not going to panic. You're going to trust that they're going to come back and win certain things. I think that you could either do that, or you could say, all right, scrap what we've been doing. We're going to readjust everything, and we're going to go at this brand new approach and not put as much emphasis on you guys to win certain matchups. We're going to try to win purely off scheming. That could take away from your abilities to win as a defense, because again, a lot of people will talk about scheme and concept and things like that. Oftentimes, the whole point of the scheme is to put your guys in positions to have good matchups to win opportunities, and that's where I think the Steelers have been trying to get it. They just haven't gotten it in some of these games. So, will it become a problem? It's been a problem for 2 weeks. It's going to be up to either the players to not lose those matchups, or if it keeps going, then it becomes the question of how long do you wait as a coaching staff to say, all right, you know what? We're not going to call much man coverage defense, where you guys are on islands and just running with guys. We're going to be a little bit more conservative. The Steelers are very aggressive right now. They have like the 5th highest blitz rate in the NFL at this point, I believe. And that's a lot higher than where they have been. Terrell Austin's defenses have not been known to do that. They've been more conservative up front and aggressive on the back end with what they're disguising. And I think that's where it's going to be interesting to see is, do they keep up this identity that they're trying to establish? And again, they're doing it with a lot of new pieces and a lot of hurt pieces. They're still missing their starting defensive tackle, Derek Harmon. His replacement, Isaiah Loudermilk's now going to be out. Deshaun Elliott's been out. Joey Porter's been out. Now Alex Highsmith's going to miss. They've been missing guys, and other guys like Patrick Queen are playing hurt. So, and that's not that we have excuses for them, but the entire picture, whenever people say, oh, it's the most expensive defense, well, when 5 starters aren't there, it starts to chip away at, who you have available. So I think that the defense has certain challenges. I just think that it's going to take time to assess, hey, it is just that these guys can't win these matchups. But again, while you're figuring that out, you want to be winning games, because the other thing about this is, are people as up in arms about this defense if Kaleb Johnson doesn't let a kickoff bounce over his head, and if Calvin Austin doesn't tip a touchdown pass to Pat Freiermuth to the other team? Because if that happens, you probably have a 14-point swing and a 14-point loss with the Calvin Austin interception, and then you also have the Kaleb Johnson not handing over 7 points. Either there, you give 7 points to the Steelers with the touchdown to Freiermuth, you take away 7 points with the kickoff, and all of a sudden it's a tie game, and it's a completely different opportunity for the Steelers in the second half. I just think that the Steelers aren't going to hit a panic button just yet, but where I do think that they might look at to reset them things is if after the bye week through 4 games that this defense hasn't had that, okay, that this is what we were expecting type of performance.
Chris, first of all, I want to apologize. I had a couple of assistants here who also had some thoughts on the topic that you heard there at the beginning. Also wanted to ask you about this because you noted it on Twitter. I saw another film study. I apologize if he hops in the comments. We'll give you credit for that. But the 2 long touchdowns, and the one in week 1 to Garrett Wilson, and then Tory Horton this past week against Seattle were functionally the same play of like crossers in the middle of the field with the safety biting on one and then the corner getting beat for the long touchdown on the other. I mean, they look almost identical if you watch those plays back. That's the type of thing that I think makes people worry that you're just going to get beat. I mean, they saw the exact same thing and had the exact same result. Why should we think that that's not going to happen a third week in a row? And because that's how I am interpreting the defense. You're right. Certainly things could have gone differently if you didn't have some of those other gaffes. But regardless of whether they won or lost the game, they still got exposed on the same play twice in 2 weeks.
Well, there's being exposed and also just, hey, they beat us on this one. For example, week 1, I thought the mistake with the week 1 play, and I said this live when it happened, I'm like, these are deep crossers. They caught you in a single high look and you're in man coverage. So when you have deep crossers, basically you have both cornerbacks on the outside are living on islands and they're running with these guys who are running long extending routes. And the safety who's in the middle part of the field has to choose. I can only help one of these guys. Who am I going to help? And so in the first game, the safety, who I believe actually was Jalen Ramsey on that play, jumped and helped Joey Porter Jr. But Joey Porter Jr. was up against, I think, Alan Lazard or one of the Jets' second receivers. He left Darius Slay alone with Garrett Wilson, and I'm like, well, yeah, Garrett Wilson's probably going to beat Darius Slay on a longer route just because of age and speed. And so this week, I was like, if they see it again, they need whoever's the free safety to take away the primary receiver and then entrust covering the secondary receiver with not Darius Slay, maybe put Jalen Ramsey on him. And the thing is, that's what they did this game. In the deep crossers, they did switch up how they approached it. Jalen Ramsey played outside cornerback. Juan Thornhill, when the deep crossers happened, he ran with Jackson Smith and Jigba on the deep crosser, and it was Tory Horton who was one-on-one with Jalen Ramsey. Ramsey just got beat, and I think it comes to a question, and so that is a problem, and I think the Steelers may have to recognize, hey, moving forward, the way we address this is if we see this developing or where we see this, we have to switch to a zone and pass these deep crossers off, and then that way you're not running man for man, stride for stride all the way down the field, or just say you are and say we're going to actually win it this time. Because I think part of what's happened, and this happened a few times, and I broke this down with the third down defense, I think Jalen Ramsey is kind of getting a loose leash as far as how he wants to apply his man coverage. Because so many times when he was in man coverage, he was backed off a bit, or he was allowing the receiver to get an inside leverage so that he could play an aggressive trail technique and get a chance to take away the ball. Now, that did turn into an interception at one point, but there were several third downs where he kind of just gave up the inside leverage, and the other guy was able to get a first down, get in front of his face, get open, establish inside leverage and create an easier target for Sam Darnold. It may take Jalen Ramsey saying, you know what, I know I've been trying to do it this way, but I'm going to just maintain inside leverage the entire play, because I've seen when he wants to do that, he does that. He can win there. But I think that's what has to be different right now if you're Jalen Ramsey on plays like that. Either that or you switch off into a zone coverage that sort of passes off the deep crossers instead of trying to run with them stride for stride. The other thing that can also help is that the pass rush can get home.
Yeah, I did want to ask in a little more depth about Jalen Ramsey, because I think the assessments of him have varied very widely for some people. I know Pro Football Focus in their data said he was beat 9 of 11 targets, 128 yards allowed. But in his final grade, he still got credit for the interception, credit for the pass breakup. So, they seemed to follow other guys on the defense a lot more than him. So I'll say that. So what's your interpretation of his play overall, and the adjustments that he can make and the adjustments he needs to make? Or is it just a matter of maybe he's just ending up on the wrong end of, some scheme and other situations where, the play breaks down for other reasons than him, but he's the one that gets the target and the catch allowed in the box score.
Sorry, and you're saying who?
Jalen Ramsey.
Oh, you're still talking about Ramsey. Okay, cool. I was just making sure. For me, Ramsey, I think it is just about like, hey, there's certain times where there's certain matchups where where you're expecting him to win in man coverage. But as I was saying before, as the off coverage standpoint, I think that there's times he's trying to play an aggressive style that he's played for most of his career that leads to turnovers and allows him or breakups. Like I think a big part of when I watched prime Jalen Ramsey, like when he used to go one-on-one with Antonio Brown, there were plays where he would let the guy think that they had won the route by letting him get the extra step, but he would be like aggressively playing it. So like, I'm right on your heels. And then the quarterback thinks, oh, my guy's in front of Jalen Ramsey. I'm throwing that ball, but Jalen Ramsey knows, that's what I wanted you to do. And now he's ready to pounce on it and still make a play. I think that that's where Jalen Ramsey has to figure out, can he still play that way? Or does he have to kind of play a more standard, hey, like the typical rule in man coverage is if I'm covering you, Adam, and you're lining up, say, on the left side of the offensive formation, I start off taking away your right side because your right side is the inside part of the field closer to the center. My goal is to keep you closer to the sideline. I am not going to let you my goal is to stay in between you breaking to the inside of the field for the rest of the play so that if you win, you're going to win to the outside and I'll be able to jump on that. And so I think Jalen Ramsey's allowing that to happen because in his history, he's won when he's let guys do that. That's one of his tricks that have made him a 3-time All-Pro corner. But early on, I think that like last week, the Seahawks took advantage of it. Now, I will say this, as much as we're getting on him for this week, he was unstoppable against the Jets. Not only did he have the big hit that everyone looked at, the Jets almost never went after him, and when they did, they paid for it. So, it could also just be a one-off game. Like I think that when the Steelers lose, everything gets conflated. This loss is just like the loss that I saw back in 1989. It's just everyone starts putting things together and being, I think, overly dramatic about every little thing. But when it comes to Jalen Ramsey's situation, I do think there's a question that at least I have as an evaluator. Is he doing this intentionally? Can he still do this, play this way and it not cost your team as much? That I think is the question facing Jalen Ramsey moving forward. I'm sure he probably thinks, yeah, I can do that and I'm going to keep doing that. But it's going to be up to the Steelers to say, hey, Jalen, we'd actually prefer you to play this more standard cornerback role where you're doing this so that other guys can win. Because again, on the first third down of the game, if he's just maintains that inside leverage, Darnold's probably getting sacked on that play. And there's a few other plays where I think it was a similar deal.
Yeah, I think with him, in the Seahawks game, it came back much more to the catastrophes of the touchdown to Horton and then the deep pass to Smith and Jigba late in the fourth quarter that basically, put Seattle in position to go up 2 scores. You take those 2 plays away, Chris, I think it's a pretty solid day for him still, but you can't, and that's why the Steelers are where they are. But Chris, thanks for joining me this week. Always great analysis. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already. A lot more coming at you this week. Chris will be back on Saturday with Brian Batko setting up the game against the Patriots. I'll be back Friday with Jason Mackey. And, of course, Paul Zeiss and I will be hosting the Steelers post-game show. So subscribe to the channel. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. Check out postgazette.com for all our written work, and we will talk to you again next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.